My own son laughed at my new husband during my wedding. But the moment everyone discovered who the old man really was, the entire room went dead silent. I still remember the way the room felt when the music started and everyone slowly turned to look at us. The lights were warm, the flowers were fresh, and for a brief moment, I truly believed this day would finally be about peace and second chances. I held my husband's hand tightly as we began walking down the aisle together. His grip was calm, steady, reassuring, but before I could even take in the happiness of the moment, I noticed the whispers. At first, it was subtle, a few raised eyebrows, a soft laugh that didn't belong in a wedding ceremony. Then I saw my son lean toward his wife, covering his mouth as he spoke. She smirked, glanced at my husband from head to toe, and shook her head as if this entire moment was some kind of joke. I tried to look away, to focus on the music, but the damage was already done. I could feel eyes following us, not with warmth, but with judgment. As we moved forward, the whispers grew louder, more confident. I caught fragments of words: old, weird, embarrassing. Each one landed like a small cut. My heart ached, not because of strangers, but because the people mocking us were my own family. The son I raised, the woman he chose as his partner. I had imagined this day so many times, but never like this. My husband noticed too. I felt his hand tighten slightly in mine, not out of anger, but as if to silently ask whether I was okay. I nodded, even though my chest felt heavy. I refused to let anyone steal this moment from us. I lifted my chin and kept walking, pretending I didn't see the smirks, pretending I didn't hear the laughter that followed us like a shadow. Inside, though, I was breaking. This wedding wasn't just a celebration of love. It was my decision to move on after years of loneliness, to choose happiness despite judgment. And yet, there I was, being quietly ridiculed on the very day I had hoped my family would stand beside me. Still, I stayed silent. I didn't know it then, but that silence would make what came next even more powerful. The moment that hurt the most didn't come from a stranger or a distant relative. It came from my own son. We were standing near the reception tables when he finally stopped pretending. His tone was sharp, careless, and loud enough for others to hear. He looked at my husband, then back at me, and said something that made my stomach drop. He called him an embarrassment, as if my happiness was a mistake that needed to be corrected. For a second, the world around me felt strangely quiet. Even though the room was full of voices and clinking glasses, I saw a few guests freeze, unsure whether to look away or pretend they hadn't heard. My daughter-in-law didn't try to stop him. Instead, she crossed her arms and nodded, her lips curled in a satisfied smile, as if this was a conversation they had rehearsed long before the wedding day. I felt my face grow hot, a mix of humiliation and disbelief washing over me. This wasn't a private disagreement. This was a public attack, delivered in front of family, friends, and people who had come to celebrate our union. I wanted to shout, to remind him of the values I had taught him, to ask when he had learned to speak to his own mother with such cruelty. But my voice refused to come out. My husband stood beside me, calm and composed, even as the words hung in the air. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply listened, his expression unreadable. That somehow made it worse. The silence felt heavier than any argument could have been. I could sense people watching closely, waiting to see how we would react, as if this were part of the entertainment. My son went on, saying it wasn't too late for me to come to my senses. Each sentence felt like a betrayal layered on top of another. This was the same child I had comforted, protected, and sacrificed for. Now, on the happiest day of my life, he was tearing it apart with words that couldn't be taken back. I lowered my eyes, not because I agreed with him, but because I refused to give him the reaction he seemed to want. Deep down, I knew something he didn't. I knew my husband's silence wasn't weakness. And soon enough, everyone else would understand that too. After that moment, I made a decision that surprised even me. I chose silence, Not the kind that comes from fear, but the kind that comes from restraint. I stood there, listening as conversations continued around us, pretending everything was normal, while my heart raced inside my chest. Every instinct in me wanted to explain, to defend my husband, to tell my son how deeply he had crossed the line. But I didn't. I swallowed every word and forced a calm smile onto my face. People were watching us closely now. I could feel it in the way their eyes lingered, the way voices lowered whenever we walked past. Some looked at my husband with curiosity, others with quiet judgment. I knew what they were thinking. Who was this man? Why had I chosen him? Was my son right? The assumptions filled the room like invisible smoke, thick and suffocating. My husband remained quiet too. He moved through the reception with grace, greeting guests politely, thanking them for coming, never once acknowledging the disrespect that had been thrown his way. That composure only seemed to confuse people more. A few guests whispered that he must not understand what was being said. Others assumed he simply didn't care. None of them knew the truth. Inside, my thoughts were loud. I replayed every comment, every laugh, every sideways glance. I wondered how easily love could turn into judgment when it didn't fit someone else's expectations. I thought about the years I had spent alone after my first marriage ended, the loneliness my son had witnessed but seemed to have forgotten. This man beside me had brought peace back into my life, yet no one wanted to see that. They only saw his age, his quiet nature, and whatever story they had already decided to believe. The hardest part was resisting the urge to correct them. Silence can feel like surrender. And for a moment, I worried that by saying nothing, I was allowing the disrespect to continue. But deep down, I trusted my husband. I trusted the timing. I knew there was a reason he hadn't spoken yet. As the evening went on, the tension only grew. People sensed something was coming, even if they couldn't explain why. And while everyone else judged the old man in their own minds, I stood quietly, knowing that their assumptions were about to crumble in ways they never expected. The shift happened so suddenly that it felt like the air in the room changed. My husband had been quietly listening all evening, smiling politely, letting the whispers and judgments pass without reaction. Then, at the perfect moment, he stood up. The music faded slightly, conversation slowed, and something about the way he straightened his jacket made people look in his direction. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand attention. Somehow, he didn't need to. He began by thanking everyone for coming. His tone calm and steady. There was no anger in his words, no bitterness, just confidence. As he spoke, the room grew quieter, as if people suddenly realized this wasn't just a polite speech. This was something more. He talked about love, about finding connection later in life, about how courage isn't always loud or aggressive. Each sentence was measured, thoughtful, and impossible to ignore. I watched my son's expression shift from boredom to confusion. My daughter-in-law stopped smiling. Guests who had been whispering earlier were now fully turned toward my husband, listening closely. The same man they had dismissed all evening now held their complete attention without trying. There was something commanding in his presence, something that demanded respect simply by existing. Then he addressed the judgment directly, without pointing fingers or calling anyone out by name. He spoke about assumptions, about how easy it is to reduce people to appearances and labels. He said age is often mistaken for weakness, and silence for ignorance. His words landed softly, but the message was sharp. I could see people shifting uncomfortably in their seats, realizing those words applied to them. My heart pounded as pride replaced the pain I had been carrying all night. This was the man I married, not because of status or image, but because of his integrity. When he finished, he simply smiled, lifted his glass, and sat back down beside me as if he hadn't just turned the entire room upside down. No one clapped right away. They didn't know how. The silence that followed wasn't mocking anymore. It was stunned, and in that moment, I knew everything was about to change. It didn't take long for the truth to surface after my husband sat down. At first, people exchanged confused looks. clearly unsettled by the calm authority in his words. Then someone near the front whispered his name, not as a joke this time, but with disbelief. The reaction spread quickly, like a ripple moving across the room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones came out. Faces that had once looked amused now looked unsure. What they learned changed everything. My husband wasn't just some quiet older man I had married out of loneliness. As many had assumed, he was someone with a past that commanded respect, a life built on discipline, responsibility, and accomplishments no one had bothered to ask about. As guests pieced it together, their expressions shifted from judgment to shock. The same people who had laughed earlier now avoided eye contact, suddenly embarrassed by their own behavior. I watched my son's face drain of color as the realization hit him fully. His confident posture collapsed into stiffness. He looked at his wife, who no longer had anything to say. Her earlier smirk was gone, replaced by wide eyes and a tight jaw. For the first time that evening, they were silent, not because they were choosing to be, but because they didn't know what to say anymore. People began approaching our table, offering compliments that felt rushed and awkward. Some praised my husband's speech. Others apologized indirectly, saying things like they had misunderstood or made assumptions. My husband accepted their words graciously, never rubbing the truth in their faces. That humility made their discomfort even more obvious. As for me, I felt something settle inside my chest. The pain, the embarrassment, the anger I had been holding all night slowly gave way to relief. Justice hadn't come through shouting or confrontation. It came through patience and dignity. The old man they had mocked didn't need to prove himself with arrogance. His presence alone had done that. By the end of the night, the laughter was gone. So were the whispers. What remained was a heavy lesson for everyone in that room, especially my son and his wife. They didn't just misjudge my husband. They misjudged love, strength, and the quiet power of knowing exactly who you are. If stories like this remind you how powerful dignity and quiet strength can be, please subscribe to this channel. These stories matter, and so do the lessons behind them.